Hello and welcome to a special edition of Community Update. I'm your host, I'm Andre Evans, and today's topic we're going to be talking about the future of public access television. And we're here with our very own Director of Brookline Interactive Group, Miss Kathy Bisbee. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. Tell us what's going on.
Well, I can tell you a little bit about, first of all, like you mentioned earlier, we've been around for 35 years. 35 years here in Brookline. Yeah. 36 you mentioned in Boston.
Boston, that's correct. Yes.
The Telecommunications Act of 1984 really was the act that it was an act of Congress that started public access television. And the idea was to make sure that a number of things, predominantly to make sure that the public right-of-way had a mechanism for, the kinds of harm that it was causing for communities to only have.
Harm? Well, what harm could it possibly cause? It was a voice in the communities for people.
No. This is the reason why the Telecommunications Act was passed, was to try to prevent harm. So that's what I'm explaining. So the idea of the Telecommunications Act was that these cable companies were coming in and they had monopolies, and so the harm is that communities didn't have a voice 35 years ago.
Right.
That the harm was also that you as a community member could not come into NBC or network television and say, hey, I want a show. That just didn't happen, right? Even just technologically, the access to camera tools and studio equipment like we have here just wasn't possible for the average citizen to be able to have access to those tools. So Congress, in their infinite wisdom, set up this 1984 Telecommunications Act with the intent of preventing harm to the community and providing free speech and a mechanism for paying communities back for the public right-of-way that was being used by these big corporations who are making, really billions of dollars of profit on the backs of our public right-of-way.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a way for them to pay rent, if you will, for the airwaves and for the hassle that it has causes a community. When you come in, you dig up all the wire, you're digging up the roads and you're putting down your fiber, you're putting things on the telephone poles.
A lot of work involved, yeah.
Yeah, and it's causing traffic hassles and all kinds of other harm on the community. So I think the 1984 Telecommunications Act was kind of the beginning of this community media. And it actually started in New York City, where George Stoney and a number of his students helped support community citizens who were basically wanting to see if a certain light on the light pole was having the impact that people were saying it was having or wasn't. I think they were trying to put a light in, and they documented that intersection, and then were able to show that this intersection needed a light. And so it sort of started this whole process of community storytelling and community media and making sure that people could have equipment. Back in the day before porta packs, there really wasn't a whole lot you could take out and go into the field unless you had millions of dollars, lots of money and a production company, all that.
Okay.
So that's really kind of what started it all. And I think throughout our history, I've only been in the industry for 11 years, but throughout our history, really, there have been some challenges. I think the cable companies have said, well, why are we spending all this money supporting free speech in the community? Why are we having to provide internet services in some cases? Why are these local towns that are right next to each other all able to negotiate individually with us? And I get it. As a business, I would imagine that takes a lot of time. However, they're using public infrastructure to be able to make billions of profits.
Okay.
So that's why they have to take the time to negotiate with us. And I think it's very important that we continue to fight for our right to negotiate locally for these cable franchise fees.
As I mentioned before, is there a strategy set in place for public access to be more self-sufficient, self-reliant? I know they're nonprofits. Most of them, 90% of them are nonprofits, like Manhattan Cable.
That's right. Yep.
Boston Neighborhood Network.
Cambridge, Somerville, Belmont.
Brookline, of course. Yeah, but a majority of them are nonprofit, as I said. But is there any kind of way they can kind of set up a system in place where they can kind of provide their own funding to keep?
It's a really great question, and it's actually a very complex answer. So I'll kind of break it down into three different parts. One is, so just to give you the background, 23 states around the country have lost, 22 or 23, have lost some kind of funding for community media.
Okay.
So, we've been going along fine for 34, 35 years, 36 years, and then all of a sudden, cable companies would pass legislation and they would say to state legislators, hey, we're going to get you a better deal for your consumers. We're going to lower the rate of cable in your state, and your consumers, your voters, your constituents, they'll have to pay less for cable. But we want you to reduce this obligation that we have to local communities to pay this franchise fee that funds public access television.
Okay.
So in a number of states, legislators decided, well, maybe cable subscribers need lower rates. And in every one of those states that the cable company said that they would lower the rates, they did not lower the rates. They increased the rates. So we've seen issues like that come up. We've also seen, I was most recently in California 4 years ago, and so a big chunk of my public access career has been there. And we saw them pass DIVCA in 2006, which was the Digital Infrastructure Video Competition Act, DIVCA. And the idea was they wanted to reduce what they see as an obligation to the communities that they were supporting to have community media in. So we saw 50 stations get shut down completely in California in 2010 alone. Which is a lot of places
That's a lot
that
of
no
impact
longer.
on the communities. Of people
Absolutely.
What about the staff that works, people like yourself, in a position that you're in, and that affects everybody. From it trickles down.
Exactly, from the person who covers all of our government meetings to the finance person to the person who's coming and helping you here, our assistant director.
Right.
Of course, and in fact, recently I was looking at sort of how many millions, in fact, billions of dollars. And I think we figured out, a colleague and I figured out it was about $5.9 billion. If you think about the economic impact.
Well, Boston Neighborhood Network was receiving $10 million a year from Comcast.
Right. So you think all of those budgets all across the country, there's about 1,500 of us across the country. So the most highest density that you'll see in community media is right here in Massachusetts. And you've got, Wellesley and Newton and all around us. I mean, I think we're only 3.5 miles from Boston, from BNN.
Something like, yeah.
We're closer to Boston, but we're 3 miles, I think, from BNN.
Okay.
So, for me, my closest colleague in California was an hour away.
Okay.
You weren't.
Wasn't that Anaheim? Not Anaheim, but I know there is a public access cable. Well, I think there is anyway in Anaheim.
Oh, I don't know the folks in Anaheim.
People talk about Anaheim. I know a couple of people in California who talking about Anaheim. So
yeah, they're down south. I was up in Northern California, kind of closer to San Francisco, in Santa Cruz, California. Yeah. So we had one in Santa Cruz, one over in Gilroy, 50 minutes away, another one up in San Jose, but still more county structure than it is here, where we have really hyper local. And the benefit of that in Massachusetts is that you can really organize locally.
Yeah.
So
every town has its own cable. Quincy, Somerville, because Boston's broken up into different sections.
Exactly. Yeah, and on the outskirts. Well, I mean, Cambridge is, I guess, its
Quincy,
own town.
Somerville's right on the Cambridge line. I don't know about Arlington, though.
Arlington has one. Belmont.
Okay, yeah.
Yep.
Braintree.
Yep.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I don't know about Braintree. I don't know.
They do have their own. I think it's called Braintree. BRAT, something like that.
Okay. Yeah. So that was the first thing, is that we saw this sort of infrastructure for community media start to get undermined by local legislation, statewide legislation, and then there have also been threats at the national level. So this isn't really anything new, but I do think, to your question, I think it's a really good question, and it's something that most folks in the industry probably haven't thought of until recently, because they haven't been threatened to the extent that we're currently threatened. In California, we lost all of our operating dollars. So for me, starting off as a brand new executive director, my first, I'd been in the tech industry, and I'd been I was a community organizer, so I did lots of work with the community, organizing around political issues and community-based issues.
Okay.
But then when I came into community media, it was my first year as executive director, and they said, "Oh, by the way, you're not going to have any operating budget. You've got to raise all your funds yourself." And I thought, okay, that's a pretty quick turnaround time that's expected, that we have a year. And in one case, one of the media centers I worked at, 6 months to go from being $1 million budget down to a $350,000 budget, 16 staff
That's
down
a
to
huge
2.5 staff. 40 active member shows a month, really big media centers.
How
with
did
a
you
lot of
manage to pay the
engagement.
salaries?
It was really difficult. I mean, I think, what we had to do is really look at sort of a longer term plan, even though we had to kind of consolidate and to shrink a little bit. Because the communities were really afraid that there was a possibility that the cable companies could just stop sending the check. And that is a reality. So I think for me, when I came here, what informed, my work here at Big over the last 4 years was, okay, so that happened in California. It could happen any day here. Folks in Massachusetts aren't really thinking about that. I was a little bit of Chicken Little, the sky is falling to the Mass folks. But I think now they're starting to see, okay, this is a real threat. We've kind of known it's coming. And I think all of us, I talked to my fellow EDs from across the executive directors from across Boston, the Boston area. And we've all thought about different things that we can do. But I think moving a 35-year organization from being funded in one way to being completely funded by a different mechanism like fundraising or revenue or earned income or paid productions, it's a big shift. It's a cultural shift and it's a big mentality shift, and a big team shift and getting your board to think that way. So I think we've moved that direction since I've gotten here, and members have started to see us say, okay, you've got 6 months where we'll incubate your show, we'll make sure that you're up and running, but after that 6 months you've got to find volunteer crew. Which is something we had to do in California because we just didn't have the staff to do it. We had to have members be kind of running certain aspects of the media center. I think in some ways it was really good because it forced us to do things we may not have done with
like
the resources.
Cost of membership, cost of usage of equipment.
Exactly.
For outside people that are not residents or whatever.
Yeah. And even for residents, I think you can charge a small fee and you can do it on a sliding scale. I mean, we just started membership fees here just this year for the first time in 35 years. So, we haven't had to charge.
Yeah.
But now we do.
Yeah, I understand.
Now we do.
Wow.
And I think, our goal, the board at the board level, the discussion I think was really interesting because folks said, board members brought these concerns up. A lot of our board members are members. They've been studio producers. They live here in the community. And they're really concerned about, will everybody be able to afford it? We don't want it to be an obstacle to people who have financial need and aren't able to
what does Town Hall say about all this? Because I understand Aaron has been telling me about some meetings. I wrote a letter for support, by the way.
I think that was the ascertainment hearings that we had. So when your contract comes up with the cable companies, what you have to do is go through a very prescribed process. Okay. That is, you have to have what's called an ascertainment hearing, and so you have to have 2 to 3 hours public hearing that's noticed publicly for 72 hours. People come to, and they get to talk about how they feel about public access and community television. So we've done 2 of those because we've had 2 contracts in the last 4 years. Okay. So we had our first contract negotiations with RCN in 2016. Okay. Or 2015, I think. And then we had our second contract negotiations 2 years later with Comcast. So we had to go through the whole process again. It's true. People have written us a lot of letters. Wow. So we're really appreciative of that. And then we had the FCC issue come up in the fall, and we had to ask you to write another letter. So thank you for all your letters. Thank you for all your letters. We are at a really pivotal moment for community television. I think the way we've been doing things is probably not going to be the same in 5 years, maybe even this year.
Is that the time frame that we're looking at in terms of them making all of this?
10 years ago, I would have said it was 5 years. Now I think it's 2. I think with the FCC order, we're going to find out very, very soon. Sometime between now and May, the FCC will probably move forward on that orders. One in particular, one's about local control. The other one really is specifically undermining the Telecommunications Act of 1984, which is how we were designated a community media center.
How can the public get involved? Well, other than just signing petitions, writing letters.
Exactly. Well, we definitely encouraged people to write, submit comment to the FCC. That comment period, there were 2 comment periods. Those periods are now over. They were in December. Joe Kennedy, our congressman from this area, has written a wonderful letter of support.
Okay.
But definitely letting his office know, like sending letters to him, I think is a good idea still, because letting him know that there's support here in Brookline.
Right.
I think it's good to say, hey, we know you're supportive, but we just want to pass along our gratitude and appreciation for you making sure that community media is supported for years to come. And he could have a pretty big impact on it. He and other members of I think he's on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, unless he got reassigned in this most recent Congress.
Okay.
But yeah, so I think making sure those things happen. And then I think really the thing I would ask from the community is to consider becoming a member, make a donation, if you value what we do at Big and you've been able to, even if you haven't been able to come in and make your own show, but you value this kind of programming that you do, other producers in our community do, if you value the community journalism work that we have done, each month.
Classes that you teach.
Classes that we teach for kids, 18 after school programs that we provided in the Brookline schools.
Yeah.
If you've come in and done a virtual reality demo, you're using traditional and emerging media, and you're using it because of the resources we have had.
Right.
But those are not going to last forever. So, people could hire us. They could come in and have birthday parties. There's all kinds of earned income that we also do.
I thought about something.
Yeah.
That might be a good point. And they were actually allowed to do it. Boston Neighborhood Network has a van. Yeah. I used to cover all the St. Patrick's Day parades. And they got paid for that. And they paid us like $75 to $100 each parade. We had the Bunker Hill Parade, the Caribbean Festival.
Awesome.
You guys ever think about doing something like that?
Where are they getting their funding from?
Well, Comcast was giving them $10 million a year, and different organizations would fund them and say, "Listen, we want you to go out and cover these events like the Gay Pride Parade."
Oh, that's great. So they're getting sponsorship, or were they doing it?
Yeah.
So
and they were getting a good. They paid us to do it. Yeah. Camera crew. And they had large crews. Yeah. So they had the budget to actually pay everybody.
Well, I think.
But you had to be certified and so on and so forth. Yeah. So I'm thinking maybe you guys can do the same thing. You have a van, don't you?
We used to have a van. We don't really do that in Brookline.
This might be something to think about.
Well, the problem is that funding. I know some of the folks over at BNN, and I would guarantee that most of that funding is coming from their franchise fees. That's why they had that $10 million.
We're gonna cover the parade. We'll give you $7,500, and it went up. And I was like, oh, sure. Yeah. I did almost every event they had. Bunker Hill, every parade in Boston.
Well, and there's a lot more parades in Boston.
Yeah. than of course. Now the weather's getting a little bit warmer next month or so, but I was just thinking maybe you guys could probably do the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, we've covered a lot of those events in our community. I mean, we have a community journalism program that's constantly covering events. I think there were interns and staff out at the Pan Lunar.
Right, I heard about
Pan Asian Lunar events and festivities that were at the high school this weekend. So we cover a lot of those events. The problem is that we've been covering those out of our franchise fees, and I would imagine that's what Boston's also doing. It's a little easier for a larger organization like BNN.
By Boston being a bigger city. Yeah, that's true.
There's also New TV that does paid production work. So, I mean, the other thing is I think really tricky is that we don't want to compete with other media centers, and there's so many of us. Yeah. So I tend to think that, doing paid productions in our Brookline community is probably the best place for us to do that paid work. So we are doing that, but that's a lot of productions to come up with $600,000 a year. I mean, our budget's $589,000. We've shrunk our staff considerably. We lost about 10% of our funding last year just because of the RCN negotiations. They are giving less money to the organization and to the town. And, I think we're looking at really large grants from national foundations, but we can only do that because we're doing things outside of Brookline. A lot of times we hear from foundations that they don't want to give to Brookline because they think that Brookline's a fairly privileged and wealthy community, which is true, but we also have 14% under the poverty line in Brookline, which people don't realize. And we serve a lot of those populations. We serve a lot of the underrepresented voices in our community. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of donors that probably give to a lot of organizations. They may be giving to the opera. They may be giving to their alma mater for colleges. They may be giving to their churches and youth programs and things like that. But we really want to encourage them to give to Big because I think, we had we had 80 people the first time, and then I think probably like another 30 the second ascertainment hearing, who all came in like yourself. And we're so grateful they did, because that, having those letters of support, coming up to the podium, talking about what your experience has been at Big, really shows the value of our services, both to the community, to Comcast, to the town,
Right,
what have you.
Wow. But my question is, after all this time, why now? Why is all of a sudden it's so imperative for them to do that? After all this time, after over 3 decades? I don't get that. Cambridge, Boston, I don't know how long Cambridge has been around, but I know it's a good over 2 decades.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, Cambridge
you think
is
something like that, because
I
mean, we've heard rumors, but we never really took it seriously, because I figured, well, we've been around all this time. You know, you think, 30 years, yeah, we're going to pull your funding. I'm like, wait a minute. Yeah. What's wrong? What's wrong with that picture?
I mean, my sense is, like I said, I think my sense is that from having dealt with them in California and seen, heard some of the arguments made on the other side, because I sat across from them during the negotiations for our cable franchise, is that they were getting frustrated, and I can't speak to how what's going on at the cable company level that's making them do this. But I do think that from what I heard from some of them is that, it's a business decision for them, where they really just felt like they were having to go negotiate individually with all of these different, communities about the cable fees. And so, a lot of states went to a state franchise about a decade ago. So it's not the first time. It's really, I think at the FCC level, one of the more difficult things that we've seen come up, one has to ask what's going on in the FCC right now. I mean, when we look at how they handled the whole net neutrality issue, I have some serious concerns about the ethical implications of how things are being handled at the FCC. In terms of community comments, it appears, it's not entirely clear, but it appears that there was some documents falsified in terms of public comment around in opposition to net neutrality that simply was not real people. It was bots. So I think we have to question and hope that the integrity of the FCC is still strong, but I am a little worried about that. I mean, I think we have reason to be concerned about some of our infrastructures in government right now having integrity.
I remember there was back in 2003, we sat at the table, and AT&T wanted to take BNN's Channel 3, because BNN had 3 channels, and they negotiated, we're going to take Channel 3 from you. And they made such a big fuss over that. It took them about 2 years to actually do that. BNN lost the channel. Now they're down. Actually, it's Channel 23 and Channel 9, BNN Live Station.
Okay.
And so
they're down to 2?
Yeah, they're down to 2. It used to be 3. And it was the answer channel, Channel 24. But now they just call it BNN Live, Channel 9.
Yep.
So they lost the channel for
AT&T.
AT&T.
Yep.
But they made such a big, huge fuss about it. And we're going to take this. We're going to take this from you. And they still fight with them, I think, believe till this very day.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the problem is, the root of this problem is that we have.
Plus, nobody's paying for cable no more. I think that has.
Well, that is a challenge too.
So
there's 2 challenges. I mean, one is people are jumping off of cable.
Yeah.
And that's been happening for a while.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually, the data is sort of evened out a little bit recently. I was looking at some of it. I mean, I haven't honestly, personally had cable for maybe 10 years, most of my time in community media, because I was just somebody who had an internet connection. But now, but now the way they're packaging cable and internet together, it actually makes more sense to get both of them. So I have cable at my house, and I don't even watch cable, except for the channels. But I'm mostly just using the internet. And so the bundling actually is helpful to us. And I think the competition has been good for some of the cable companies.
But there's only 2 giants now. Was it Comcast and Verizon? Nobody else is dipping in the pie.
Yeah. There's Charter. There's Time Warner.
Well, and then there's RCN, but they're on the lower end of the totem pole, because I think the biggest giants are Comcast and Verizon.
Absolutely, yeah, and Comcast and Verizon are definitely the big. And in Boston, I think they're served by Verizon as well.
Yeah. Wellesley is actually one of the. Wellesley runs on both Verizon and
oh, really?
Comcast. Yeah.
Okay.
Channel 39.
Yep. Yep. So a lot of towns you'll see two cable providers will be
Right.
there, and your town's negotiating with both of them individually. But like I said, I think the bottom line is this is the public airwaves.
It is.
The airwaves do not belong to any corporation. They belong to the people, and the cable channels belong to the people, and we hope it will stay that way.
Yeah, sure do. Wow. For those of you who are just tuning in, you're watching a special edition of Community Update. Please support your local access TV stations. We can't afford to lose them. They're a voice in our communities. We can't voice. There's no window, or whether a community without a window has no voice and no vision. So please support your local community access. Just to wrap up, so moving forward, this could happen at any time. So there's a storm coming, and we're about to get swept away, basically.
Well, we're not going to get swept away.
I think there might. I guess the better question is, this won't affect every public access facility.
Yeah.
I think there may be some, maybe a couple of them will stand, like Wellesley, for example.
Well, it will. Okay, so the FCC order will affect all of us.
Yes.
Across the country. However, it only affects. Well, it affects you in two different ways. One, it could affect you. The cable companies will likely just start charging us for the cable channels. So I don't know what it's going to cost for our channel here on Comcast, or if you're watching on RCN.
Right.
But each of the cable companies will likely charge us a per month or annual fee, and they'll take that out of off the top. So we won't ever see those funds again. And we have no idea how much it's going to be. They're not telling us. We've heard a couple rumors, but we're not really clear. It's likely to be $40,000 to $60,000 that they're assigning a value on what they think that community channel is valued at. If they're going to do that, I'd like to see some numbers about how many people are watching us.
Too.
That would be helpful.
I would too.
And it would also be nice to have a little bit of a sense of which times are we getting more viewership, and that's something they have not been willing to give us. So that's something certainly maybe we can ask for, but we have very little ability to hold the cable companies accountable. Now some of them, I have to say, some of them also have given donations to media centers.
Right.
I know Comcast has done that. I'm pretty sure RCN has done that. But to get rid of these in-kind donations and call cable channels in-kind donations really just completely undermines the Telecommunications Act of 1984. It's a way of it's circumventing the whole law, and I hope that Congress won't have anything of that. We certainly will mount a legal challenge and an appeal. The Alliance for Community Media, which is the industry organization that kind of takes care of all of us.
I became a member of SIMPI.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So.
Oh, of SIMPI. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, definitely consider becoming a member of the Alliance for Community Media too, because they are fighting for our rights nationally and at the local level. Also, Mass Access has been really working hard. I actually think the last couple
Wasn't there PEG too? PEG? Wasn't that a different organization? I
don't
heard
know
about it
that
years ago when I'm originally from Boston. I signed up at BNN and became a member like 1990.
Yeah.
And there was a group called PEG.
I don't know who that was.
PEG was like a public access.
Well, usually PEG stands for Public Educational and Government, so all of us call ourselves PEGs.
Yeah. Okay.
So you might have heard us reference that.
Yeah.
Because if you have a public access channel, an educational channel, and a government channel, that's usually called a PEG. But that language is kind of out of date now. I mean, in fact, we don't even really call ourselves public access television anymore.
I know, Brookline Interactive Group.
Well, we changed our name, but it's also because we're not just TV.
Right.
And we're not just public access.
More or less.
We're multimedia. We're interdisciplinary artists. We're fostering a next generation of community makers. And creativity and self-expression, and I think that's much bigger than just television.
Yeah,
whatever we call it,
and it's not even television anymore, broadcast anymore. I think it's called streaming now.
We call it cablecast, and then streaming,
that's old too.
Cablecast is old too. I know, it's true.
Wow.
But yeah, so that's, we'll see what happens. I think we will find out sometime in the next 4 to 6 months kind of what that's going to look like.
Yeah.
Here we're looking at, we're going to be okay until July 1st because we've budgeted for that.
Oh, wow.
However, as soon as that fiscal year hits, my sense is that will probably take a pretty big hit. Probably about 20% of our funding will go away. And we already lost 10% just this last year because of the RCN issue. So
Right.
yeah. So we look forward to fundraising if anybody wants to volunteer.
Support your local community access. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I want to thank Kathy Bisbee for being here today and giving us the rundown on how we can provide and to keep our public access, keep our voices in the community. It's very important. Again, support your local community access. And for more information, log on to the website at thebeantv.com. That's thebeantv.com for more information. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. I'm Andre Evans. We'll see you again next week. Thank you for watching.